Hello, this is Sarah V, and today I am going to be making another jumper dress. I am using a vintage reproduction pattern, Butterick 6955, and it has this wraparound belt that's attached to the bodice that buckles in the back. I am very excited to see how that part turns out, and I am going to be using this gray cotton grid plaid. I got this plaid recently, back in November when I went to Fabricmart, and I'm very excited to get to use it. The first order of business is to cut everything out. I am starting with the front skirt panel. After cutting one side out, I take the pattern off and flip it over to match the plaid and cut it out so that I have both front skirt pieces. I am also cutting out the front bodice at the bottom of the table, flipping it once one side is cut to get the whole piece cut out. I did actually iron this fabric, though you can't tell, but at least it laid flat enough to cut. This pattern also calls for armhole bias facings, and instead of struggling like I normally do, I tried a trick that Serena uses where she irons the bias with the armhole so that it actually wants to be in that shape, and it really made a difference and it was quite easy. So I think I'll probably be doing that again. Next, I am cutting out the bodice back pieces, followed by the back skirt pieces, careful to match it to the front. Now that the largest pieces are cut out, I am cutting the front and back facings out of a scrap. The last pieces to cut out are the 4 wrap belt pieces, and then after I took a break I realized I wanted pockets, so I cut those out off camera along with the interfacing for the front and back neck facing. I also had to cut out the bias for the armhole facings and the desired width that the pattern told me to cut it out from. To mark out all of my darts, I am using a tracing wheel and transfer paper. I chose this method because the front waist darts are curved. I do not use this method if I am using a vintage pattern because the tracing wheel is very damaging to the tissue. I only use it on vintage patterns if it is copied to a different paper, but for just regular reproduction vintage patterns where it's like new paper, I don't really care. Now that all my darts are marked, I can pin them together with Mr. Scooter. After my darts, I am pinning the pockets to the side seams and pinning the center front off camera before setting it aside. I did this for both front and back panels. Over at my machine, I am sewing all of my darts on both the front and back bodice pieces. For a thinner fabric like this, I don't backstitch at the point. Instead, I leave a tail of string and just tie it off. After the darts, I am sewing the shoulder seams, followed by the shoulder seams of the facings. Over at the ironing board, I am pressing the shoulder seams of the facing, followed by the bodice shoulder seams and all of the darts. And I am also trying to iron out some of those wrinkles that didn't get ironed out before I cut everything out. Before I can sew the facing in, I am pinning and sewing in my label. Now I can pin the neck facing to the bodice. The first time I tried pinning it in, I realized I sewed the label in at the center front. I don't usually do dresses with back zippers. I tend to do ones with side zippers, so I'm used to the back facing being complete and not in two pieces. So that was just a little mistake I had to fix. I am sewing the neck facing down now. Afterwards, I can trim and press it into place and move on to the armhole bias facing. In order to finish the bodice, I must move on to the wrap belt and sew them together. After trimming them, I can turn them out. The one I did on camera, I forgot to clip the curves, but it ended up okay. And then the one I did off camera, I did clip the curves and they seem to have turned out the same. I think it was just because the curve wasn't super curved that I was able to iron it into place basically. At my ironing board, I can press them into place, and then once I get over at the machine again, I can top stitch at 3/8 inches as instructed in the pattern. I can now insert the belts into the side seams, matching the notches and stitching them in. Now that the side seams are sewn, I serged the side seams and center back seams and trimmed and clipped the armholes before turning, flipping, and top stitching the armhole bias down. Moving on to the skirt, I am sewing the front skirt pieces together at the center front. Then I am sewing the pockets to the side seams and understitching them so they stay in place. Onto the back skirt, I am sewing the center back seam, and I forgot to leave the top open for the zipper, so I had to open the top up and back stitch where the zipper should end. Now I can sew the pockets to the back side seam, and these ones I am not understitching. At the ironing board, I am pressing the center back in, center front skirt seams before I can pin the side seams and sew them up. After sewing the side seams, I press them open as well. Before joining the top to the bottom, I am pinning them together, matching center front, side seams, and center back. I am now able to sew the waist seam. After it is sewn, I serged it before edge stitching it so that the seam allowance stays up, pointed towards the bodice. Moving on, I am inserting the zipper. I am first sewing the zipper to the right side, sewing close to the fabric's edge. The left side of the zipper is lapped over the right side to cover it and stitched into place. Before moving on to the hand sewing, I am quickly top stitching the neckline at 3/8 inches, not sewing over the zipper because if you sew over the zipper, it won't go up the whole way. I am pinning up my hem at 1 inch because I wanted to keep the dress longer. I don't know what the pattern actually told me to do, but when I tried it on, I decided I wanted it longer. Now I can stitch the hem into place. After sewing an eyelet in, I will do a final press of the hem and it will be finished. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. I think it turned out very cute. My only problem that I have with it is the wrap belt, because if your body isn't perfectly shaped how the pattern wants it to be, it kind of will sit out because I'm asymmetrical. So this side sits fine, but this side just kind of wants to like stick out because this side's straighter. So, and it's also not super size adjustable if you want to keep the buckle centered in the back, because if you add more eyelets to the one side, it's just going to move the buckle with it too. And I'm really excited to have some black in my wardrobe. I think this is like maybe the second thing I've ever made out of black. And then the next dress I want to make is also going to be black. So I'm very excited about that. However, I do eventually need to make a black skirt because I have no black skirts. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. And if you would like to see more sewing content, please subscribe. If you would like to see what I'm up to day to day, feel free to follow me on Instagram at Sarah V Sews Vintage. Thank you again for watching, and see you next time.